On Monday, God created the world. On Tuesday, God separated chaos and order. On Wednesday, God went into meticulous detail, creating the many wonders of this earth. On Thursday, God allowed time to flow. On Friday, God looked over each and every corner of this world. On Saturday, God rested. But on Sunday, God abandoned us.
A situation that you don't tend to see explored in many aspects of the story is the idea of having God directly affecting and holding relevance in regards to the events of a given series. Sure, you may have characters that happen to believe in God or something along those lines, but you don't usually see God being a major attribute in the series itself. Perhaps this is due to not wanting to offend viewers' religious beliefs, or perhaps those working on the series simply don't feel they can write a story that effectively utilizes God. So, does Sunday Without God do this effectively? Well, that's what we're here to find out, yes? Review number 2. Will it have an impact on you? Sunday Without God's premise can possibly be surmised by its title, at least in simplest terms. One Sunday, God declared upon all the mountain tops, supposedly, that heaven was out of space, and as such, no one currently alive would ever be able to enter onto God's kingdom. Because of this, people discover that they no longer possess the ability to die, get a major artery cut, limbs blown off, shot through the heart, song reference. No matter what, you will no longer die in the conventional sense. As long as your brain isn't damaged in some way, you will continue to exist upon the earth as you normally would, aside from whatever the results of your major injury were. However, despite the brain continuing to work, one's bodily functions will indeed cease, which results in a major distinction between the living and the deceased. Because without those functions, the bodies and minds of these deceased will gradually decay unless they are maintained. If these precautions aren't taken, the decomposing process will go on until, you basically turn into a zombie. Fun times, right? In order to help those who don't want to live forever and would like to truly rest in peace, God sent upon the world the gravekeepers, supposedly emotionless beings who can bury the deceased in order to lay them to rest. Our story begins in a small village in what seems to be France, where our protagonist, young gravekeeper named Ai, has lived her entire life. Her mother died when she was young, and she's never met her father, so Ai has subsequently grown quite close to the other villagers due to how well they take care of her in place of her parents. Ai's life is, all things considered, rather simple at first. She serves her duties as a gravekeeper, laying to rest those who've died, and lives a rather quiet and stable life. Until one day, a reserved man by the name of Hampney Hambert arrives and kills everyone in the village. Yeah, quite a way to start things off. Eventually, Hampney informs the obviously jarred and enraged Ai that everyone in the town was already deceased, and he happened to shoot them all in the brain so that they could be laid to rest, since he believes that should happen to all deceased humans instead of allowing them to continue walking the planet. So naturally, Ai's rather quiet life is now completely decimated, and she has no reason to remain in the village since no one else is there. Because of this, Ai ultimately decides it is her duty as a gravekeeper to journey out into the world and try to find a way to save those who inhabit it in some way, shape, or form. Now this may sound like a vague objective, and that's because it is. I doesn't exactly know how she's going to go about achieving this goal or in what specific manner she'll implement it. Part of her development as a character comes from I bearing witness to the world outside her village and discovering how people in society have attempted to cope with not being able to die. As a result, her ideas of how exactly to save this world need to be constituted by what she sees and what notions she derives from the places and people she meets. Unfortunately, with this show being only 13 episodes long, this development is not seen completely through. Though I will say, what we did get in regards to her development was fairly good. Sunday Without God operates under a system of moving between small 2 to 3 episode arcs. These arcs explore different places in the world, as well as how they and the people living within them have attempted to cope with not being able to die, which as a concept is unbelievably interesting. I mean, imagine how many different directions this could be taken in. Losing the ability to die is a big deal that would send shockwaves throughout any society, and being able to see the aftermath of those shockwaves, yeah, that sounds pretty damn interesting. And for the first 2 arcs, this show does this, and does this very well. However, the final 2 arcs instead seem to sideline this aspect of the series in favor of focusing on a far less interesting subplot, which happens to involve certain wishes that God granted to people as a final parting gift. These wishes tended to result in supernatural powers being bestowed upon the wishers. And while this subplot was present in the first 2 arcs as well, it never felt overbearing, or it never felt like it was distracting, I should say, from the unbelievably more interesting main plot. But in the last 2 arcs, this all changes. The wishes become the main focus, and the supernatural aspect floods into the show so quickly and forcefully that the main plot almost feels like it gets discarded. Now, I don't mind it when shows take time to focus on something other than the main plot. That's perfectly fine. But whatever you're choosing to focus on needs to be interesting and well presented, as should, the main plot. But the final arcs in Sunday Without God aren't interesting, feel more overbearing and unnecessarily complex than anything else, and worst of all, are the final arcs. As a result, the series ends without the main plot being resolved, and so you're left with this feeling of discontent and wanting to see more so that the main plot can be returned to and can be resolved. And there isn't even an attempt at closure with the ending. Like, at least they could have tried to make the ending feel satisfying, even if everything wasn't dissolved. But instead, it just kind of ends very abruptly, and it certainly isn't satisfying. Now, if a second season comes along, which it might, since the series is relatively new, and returns to the main plot, and goes to further the story and I's development, then I'll be able to forgive most of this. Sure, I still won't like these 2 arcs, but at least the series would be back on the right track. But until that hypothetical day that a second season is announced, my thirst for this show's intriguing premise and story shall go unquenched. As far as characters are concerned, I is really the only main character this series has, with the rest of them falling into the supporting section. Said supporting characters can basically be split into 2 classes, those that are present for 1 or 2 arcs only, and those that are present throughout the entirety of the show and accompany Ai on her journey. Those characters bound to specific arcs are mostly as good as said arcs were. Those from the first 2 arcs were interesting and well developed for what screen time they got, and those from the latter 2 arcs were either far too underdeveloped or were developed in rather uninteresting ways. The ones that are present throughout the story are neat on the surface, but really did need to get greater individual focus. And I'm not surprised that they didn't get this focus, since focus for characters like these who are around for multiple arcs would tend to be more gradual. And since this series simply runs out of episodes before this gradual focus can evolve into full-on development, it's just not that surprising. Again, this would ideally be resolved and these characters would get completed development in a hypothetical second season. But until one comes around, this serves as another unfortunate loose end for the series. Ai herself is probably what you'd expect for a 12-year-old girl trying to take on the massive responsibility of saving the world. She's foolish at times due to her young age, but also very idealistic, which is a quality I like to see in characters who are trying to affect the world for the better. She's also very aware of her responsibilities, as she always wants to assist the people she comes across and doesn't shy away from this. However, her dedication to her objectives can sometimes get her involved in messy situations. Though her dedication ultimately does pay off, and she is able to find ways to resolve these messy situations, which only further shows her determination to save whom and what she can in this world, which is rather admirable. Also, she's very cute and moe because, anime, and this tends to make you want to see her succeed and grow from the situation she finds herself in. But as I said previously, her development is not completed at the show's conclusion. It does go somewhere, she does develop to some degree, but not as much as she logically should. The animation for Sunday Without God was done by Madhouse, and like most of their productions, looks, pretty amazing. Especially the settings and locations themselves, which just have so much vibrancy and luster to them. Sound-wise, the series has only one opening and ending due to its short length. The opening is pretty cool, I'd say. It wasn't one that I was particularly huge on at first, but after a few episodes it did grow on me. The ending, however, grabbed me almost immediately, which is rather surprising since it's pretty much just still images with the song played over them. But it ends up having a lot of charm because of this. Also, the song is pretty good itself, and has a rather befitting tone for an ending theme. The dub was done by Sentai Filmworks, and it was pretty great. Really, I have no complaints towards it. The performances were strong, even from lesser-known voice actors and actresses, like Caitlin French's Ai, for example. There are no issues with lip flaps, and good dub is good. This just shows that Sentai can indeed make great dubs, despite what many people may think about them, and despite some of their less than stellar releases every now and then. Sunday Without God was a series that truly had some amazing potential with its premise. It's unique in its direct usage of God and how it applies that particular attribute. The premise allows for a plethora of possible paths and turns for the series to explore in regards to how the world has adapted and changed due to God abandoning it, and Ai is a very likable main character who has some pretty neat development set up for her. But those last two arcs really do damage the momentum this series had at first, because really, the first two arcs are very strong, albeit not completely perfect. Hell, the first episode alone is one of the strongest first episodes of any anime I've seen, and that says a lot. But the last two arcs sideline the main story in favor of the far less interesting and far more overbearing and complex Wishes subplot. And then the series ends without a resolution to the main plot and gives you very little satisfaction in general, which is pretty unfortunate. Really, this show should have tried to keep the supernatural stuff as minimal as possible. Obviously, with God being an integral component of the series, some supernatural aspects were going to need to be there. But the stuff about wishes, superpowers, etc. just strips away the show's realism. And I feel keeping as much realism as possible, considering the premise, would have been the optimal way to go, because it would have made exploring the impacts of God abandoning the world far more understandable and relatable. But the overwhelming level of supernatural elements that are thrown into this series makes this realism rather hard to find, especially after the first two arcs. Like I said before, a second season that returns to focusing on the main story would resolve a number of my issues with this series. Not every issue, clearly, but many of them. And while, as I say these words now, no continuation has been announced, I do feel that the potential for one should be taken into consideration, even though that potential does not absolve this series of its existing sins. But despite all this, there is a lot of good in this series, especially with the premise. Oh my god, this premise is so it just draws you in. I love it, and that makes me hate the fact that the series goes off and deals with this wishes subplot instead, so much more so than I would have had I not found the beginning premise to be all that interesting. But despite all of this, despite all the problems, I do believe that the good in this series outweighs the bad. And so, in accordance with everything I have just said, I shall be bestowing upon Sunday Without God a score of 7.46 out of 10, and as such, a designation of good. And ultimately, I give this show a recommendation that you stream it with high priority, because there is a lot of good in this series, and there is enough to warrant watching it with relative quickness. Like, you should go out and see this. Maybe not right away, but sooner rather than later. I don't think it's worth buying unless we do get a second season that fixes things, because the ending does hurt it, and it may not be something you want to rewatch, but it is still worth watching at least once, and perhaps more so if we do get a second season that fixes things. Then this recommendation may change, but, that's all hypothetical. If, however, you do wish to purchase this series, you can buy it on Blu-ray and DVD from Sentai Filmworks. In addition, if you would rather stream, as I happen to suggest, you can find the series in subbed form on both Hulu and Crunchyroll. As far as other anime that you very well may enjoy if you happen to like Sunday Without God, I point you towards first, Angel Beats, mainly because the setting also involves God having a direct influence due to, the setting being purgatory, and also the characters can't die because they are in purgatory. Second, I point you towards Kino's journey due to there being a journey and Kino traveling to a bunch of different countries and seeing what's going on there, which is sort of similar to how Ai travels the world and seeing, how all of these other parts of the world are adapting to God being gone. And finally, Claymore. Mainly because the Claymores remind me of the Gravekeepers. Sure, the Claymores fight giant monsters and the Gravekeepers just bury people, but, kinda similar, kinda. So, those three. Hopefully that they will all please you. I mean, there isn't one series that is exactly like Sunday Without God, but these three have at least one aspect similar to Sunday Without God. I mean, Claymore also kind of has a journey aspect to it. Not as much so as Kino's journey, but it also has that. So, it has that going for it too. So yeah, that recommendation is fully justified. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. Hopefully, the next one will be out sooner than this one. I know it took me over a month, but things kind of ended up getting in the way and delaying my plans for this. But, it's out now, and hopefully the next one will be out sooner, but we'll have to see. And I apologize if this review seems a bit short. I was trying to not let it get anywhere near as long as the Clanad review did, since that was 32 minutes. So hopefully this one turns out to be shorter, because I have no idea as I'm recording this how long it will be, since I haven't edited or anything. But hopefully it'll be below 32 minutes. And hopefully there's still enough analysis in here to please those who enjoyed that from my Clanad review. So yes, hopefully I will see you all sooner rather than later. Take it easy, or something like that. I don't know why I'm still talking. I should probably stop. Okay, bye.